Yeah, the funny thing is, if you think about, we build a digital product, and that should save lots of paper, but we probably killed more trees of the people printing those directions than anything else. But I will timestamp this. This is 9 years before Google Maps comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
9 years. So that's how early we were, and we were a big early internet player.
Welcome to Triangle Tweener Talks, a weekly podcast by builders for builders where we explore the startup journey from the idea to the exit and all the lessons in between with an exclusive focus on founders from the Triangle region of North Carolina. Now here's your host, serial founder and general partner of the Triangle Tweener Fund, Scott Wingo.
Welcome to this episode of Triangle Tweener Talks featuring Chris Heivly. This episode is brought to you by our amazing and awesome sauce sponsors, including Robinson Bradshaw, a full-service business law firm with a passion for supporting the Triangle's entrepreneurial ecosystem. Learn more about Robinson Bradshaw startup and venture capital practice at robinsonbradshaw.com. EisnerAmper, formerly HPG, one of the world's largest business consulting firms with a dedicated technology practice offering outsourcing, accounting, tax, and advisory services. EisnerAmper's experienced professionals serve more than 2,000 technology companies from early-stage startups to public enterprises. Discover how EisnerAmper's stage-specific solutions and industry expertise can help you achieve your milestones, whether startup, international expansion, M&A, or IPO. Visit eisneramper.com/tech for more details. ATG Aligned Technology Group. Are you navigating high cloud cost as a startup? ATG helps you maximize your free AWS Activate credits available to startups for up to $100,000. If you're an AI startup, you can get up to $300,000 through these programs. As ATG is an AWS Advanced Tier partner, they help streamline your cloud journey, optimize your security, your scalability, and your cost efficiency. Startups move fast. We help you build smarter. Visit Align Technology Group to learn more about how to unlock your AWS credits today. Bank of America, B of A's transformative technology group helps game-changing tech businesses and founders realize their boldest ambitions across a wide range of technology sectors. With hands-on support, world-class resources, and an extensive network, B of A provides the stability and scalability that tech companies need to rapidly grow today and into the future. Whitley Recruiting Partners. Whitley Recruiting Partners specializes in recruiting top tech talent for growth stage startups in the Triangle. They help target industry-specific entrepreneurial employees who drive immediate results through a fast, accurate, and scalable recruiting process. There is a special offer for Tweener Talks subscribers. You can get a free survey of the local talent available for any one of your job openings. And last but not least, Extensis HR. As a professional employer organization, or PEO, Extensis empowers tech founders and growing businesses to scale smarter. They take HR administration off your plate, yay, managing payroll, recruiting, employee benefits, and retirement plans, compliance, risk, and more, so you can focus on innovation. For over 25 years, Extensis has leveraged a people-first approach, customer-centric mindset, and deep industry expertise to ensure employers have the tools they need to stay competitive in today's market. And finally, thanks to our friends at WalkWest/Earfluence for partnering with us to produce this podcast. Do you need a podcast? Call Earfluence today. Longtime followers of the show will remember I started this whole Tweener Talks journey with what I call the foundational episode. And then there I revealed the framework of generations of founders. The most rare cohort in there is founders from the 70s and 80s. There's maybe a handful, if not less than two handfuls. One of those founders is Chris Heivly. This story starts with a fellow Gamecock who has a love of maps. Chris tells the story better than I do, so I'm going to pause there and leave you with that cliffhanger about maps and being a Gamecock and all that good stuff. But I do want to then circle back and say Chris's achievements and contributions in the Triangle startup ecosystem have been huge. He brought one of the first incubators to the area with Launchbox Digital, which then kind of morphed into the Startup Factory, which was a very active accelerator out of the American Underground from 2012 to 2016. As Chris discusses, there's still a lot of companies from that cohort that are chugging along today. After that, he worked with Techstars on their global ambitions and has done a lot more that he'll cover. Through his career, Chris has made a huge impact on the Triangle ecosystem. And for me, he is a great example of a successful founder that doesn't just disappear. He stays in the Triangle and embodies the Triangle's paying it forward spirit. In this episode, you get to hear not only those details, but the why. What makes Chris tick? And what is his favorite map? Stay tuned for answers to that question and many more, and enjoy this interview with Chris Heivly.
From suburb of Philadelphia. So go Eagles, go Flyers, big sports family. And, but I went to local college there, became a geographer. I do remember the day I told my father I was going to be a geography major. And he said, son, what are you going to do with that? As we'll find out, to those who don't know me, you'll find out that it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, let's dig into that. So you're a kid. What was interesting to you about geography?
I think I love maps. Mm-hmm. The maps, there's just so much there, right? And I don't know if you remember the days of sitting with a road atlas in the back seat, right? I mean, there's so much world to explore and understand and be curious about. So turns out I think I have a very spatial kind of bent in my head. Maps are about spatial stuff. At one point I said, maybe I'll be an architect, which is also spatial. So somehow there's some spatial thing happening in my head.
What's your favorite type of map? Are you a topo guy or a globe or?
I love them all. I've collected over the years, like old atlases. I have, 200-year-old maps, framed and sitting in my house. Loved street maps at the time, loved topo maps. So I guess all the above is what I'm saying.
If there's a fire, what's the one map you save? What's your favorite map?
Oh, shit. That's a good question. I have one that's from 1820s or 1840s of Europe. And it actually has, elevation depicted, remember this was all going to be hand drawn at the time. And there's color in it and there's so much detail. I could just stare at that for a long, long time. And I think good to know. I got to, with my go bag, grab that map.
Yeah. Kind of makes you wonder, how many people, how many hours went into that back in the day. It
exactly.
wasn't just print it off again kind of thing. So you and I both went to South Carolina. So you're up in Philly, going to school, going to maps, learning about, cartography and whatnot. And how do you end up at South Carolina of all places?
So interesting time. At the time, we called this computer mapping. Now, this is kind of very early 80s. Mm-hmm. So I had took a computer mapping class, which is all on a mainframe and a printer, right? Like a line printer. You remember those at all? And, this is after cards, but before PCs. Mm-hmm. And, but just totally got into this computer mapping thing. And so I don't know why it just lit that fire. Hopefully we all have one of those moments. That was mine in a computer mapping class. The professor and I just started geeking out on that. And he was learning as much as I was at the time. And I'd spend hours in his office and we'd be, reading and talking.
Is this on must have been a mainframe of some kind? Was this like a Burroughs machine or a digital electronics or
I wish I remembered, but if I'm going to guess, it's on a Burroughs machine. And we had this, this terminal, right? I think by the time I finished, that line printer, which is what your interface was, turned into a monitor, right? A black and white monitor. But I ended up taking about 9 hours of computer science courses. Mm-hmm. So I learned how to code. So today, maybe not a big deal. 1980, 81, that's
very
a big
rare.
fucking deal, right?
Yeah.
I'm a geography major, and yet I probably have enough course credits at the end of my term there to probably have a minor. I was always the only non-computer science major. They're teaching COBOL and all that kind of crap. Mm-hmm. And I was learning, I think Fortran was the
I was going to
So near the end of that my semester there, I had dropped out for a while. So by the time I finished, it was December. But in the fall there, my professor's like, I think you need to go to grad school. And it's not like an MBA where they want you to go work for a couple of years before you go to get your MBA. I mean, so there was 3 places in the U.S. that had a graduate degree in computer mapping, now called GIS. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, South Carolina was one of them.
Boom.
So mic drop.
Innovative Gamecocks right there.
Yeah. I mean,
Fascination chicken.
it's really, it's, yeah.
Cool. So you went down there and then, so you're at, now you're with your people, right? Like, tell us about
oh my God.
Before you were like the misfit toy, the one dude and probably the whole state that cared about this. And now you're with your, I'm sure it wasn't a lot of them, but like that's a lot more. Yeah. What was that like?
So my professor at the time, Dr. Dave Cowan, longtime mentor and just a terrific guy, ran a lab. So part of my graduate degree, I had a research assistantship. And this is pretty amazing, Scott. So he hands me this brand new thing called an Apple Lisa and an IBM PC with 2 disk drives, no hard drive. Mm-hmm. And he said, so you told me you knew how to code when I did the interview. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, well, make them draw maps. So that was my gig for a year. And they were just they had like some mini computer, right? Which is, disks about the size of a pizza, that were 5 megabytes.
Yep.
God, we're sounding so old.
That's super expensive.
Super expensive. But that movement to the desktop was just happening. And so I just remember writing a lot of code and like, hey, what do you think of this? And it was one of those environments that you're just like, this is so freaking cool. Anything's possible.
Lisa was way ahead of its time. Was it Smalltalk?
I got to tell you,
it had an object-oriented programming language.
It did,
but I would call it.
I wasn't smart enough to figure that out. What I will tell you, and for as you can remember, for the longest time, I mean, the IBM PC was the dog, right? Mm-hmm. It had a lot more, just the basic programming language, a compiler. It had a lot more stuff ready than the Lisa. Lisa, you had to be super geeky. I wasn't that geeky. I was just. I'm an applied geek, not a super geek.
Got it.
That makes sense.
You had to split your geek on maps and computers.
I just pushed the PC. So I geeked them.
Cool. Did you? Was that the type of so that was a master's? Was that the type of program where you had to do a thesis? Or
I did.
Yeah. What was your thesis on?
My thesis was on mental maps, and so God, I could barely describe this today, but the time. So I had another professor, super smart. And what we were able to do is look at 3 different neighborhoods in Columbia, South Carolina, and ask them to draw the relative distance between using 2 points as a reference. How much farther are these 2 points? And then in kind of what direction? And when you take all of that, probably 15 to 20 of those answers multiplied by 20 to 25 people per neighborhood, the thesis was that where you live determines your mental map. Okay. Mm-hmm. Kind of makes sense, but we need to prove it.
Yeah.
We then used multiple regression analysis, had this little thing that if you could take all that data, we could map out in dots where they thought places were as compared to reality. Uh-huh. So to wrap this up, people downtown had a much smaller world of all the points. They all reference those things as closer than you think.
Yeah.
People out in the West, if you remember the river that ran through it, they thought that kind of our thesis was that ran north-south. It actually runs more northwest to southeast. So everything was turned about 15 degrees.
Huh, interesting. Yeah.
So that was my thesis.
Yeah. People in Manhattan just know Manhattan.
Right. and then their view from that is that everything is relative to that. Right?
Yeah.
So it was fun. I mean,
cool. Yeah.
I need to do a
the
thesis.
Practical application is when you're drawing a map, there may be scenarios where it makes sense to kind of present it that way.
Well, when you get down to pure cartography, I mean, we all know that, rivers should be blue, right? And roads should not be blue because of that. But there's a lot of little rules in cartography that are based on the human psychology of how you view things, what's your spatial view of things. As an example, one of the things we learned is that when later on at Rand McNally, when more prone for women will take a map and turn it to the direction they're driving, they don't do the north-south reinterpret thing. So all that psychology is kind of part of being a good cartographer, by the way.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. So you get your master's, you graduate, and then how do you find a job with this very unique set of skills?
Yeah. I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. I was going to go work for the university until I found something with my good friend, Dave Cowan. And one day, this guy from the National Science Foundation comes through, and George Demko. He also happens to have graduated undergrad from the same undergrad as me, Westchester University, up in Philadelphia. And he's going to now run the NSF, the geography part of NSF, which is to give out grants to professors. And we start showing him all this computer mapping stuff. And he said, well, in less than a year, I'm going to take a job at the U.S. State Department. Will you come work for me? And I said, sure. Tell me when you're ready. Took 6 months to get a top secret clearance and all of that. There's an office of the geographer inside the U.S. State Department. And that was my first job, and I moved to D.C.
Got it. Total noob question, but so the GPS system's been around for quite a while, but I actually don't know when it kind of and it had a military-only utilization for a long time. Did you have access to that data at this point in the 80s, or that came later?
Access came later. I mean, that stuff was pretty high tech, and the question is, what is the GPS going to be attached to so that you can track, right?
Yeah.
So
I was thinking maybe you could just download lazily collected data and do something with it.
it. Later on when I left government, it was certainly something we were tracking more heavily, and so maybe we'll put a pin in that when we get to the MapQuest stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I just asked my friend, our research assistant, Perplexity, and they report that in '93, that's when it kind of went wide for non-military use, just as a kind of a good marker in time for a guy who loves computer maps is going to hit GPS at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So we call those P&Ds, personal navigation devices, the Garmin's. Think about that. So that's '93. MapQuest comes out in '96.
Yeah.
That's how small a window those devices had. I mean, they're still around a little bit, but that's how quickly that,
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so you go to work for the government, basically, and did that involve you moving to the D.C. area?
I did.
And do some international travel? When you say State Department, I'm picturing you visiting embassies for some reason.
Yeah. So no, I didn't have to go anywhere because they all fed the information back to us. Scott, the coolest thing, I haven't told too many people this story. So the coolest thing was, and it's really a kind of a part of my career, is finding opportunities to somehow, and it's very mutual. I say attach myself to someone, but to connect with someone so deeply that you kind of become this Batman and Robin kind of thing. And so at the U.S. State Department, in the Office of Intelligence and Research, which is like a little mini CIA analysis group of about 400 people, sat the Office of the Geographer. And we made maps for those reports. And some of those were daily reports that went to the president, secretary of state, et cetera. And some were more long-term that they might be working on for weeks about some issue happening globally. And a guy named Richard Clark was a deputy assistant secretary. Now, if you follow politics, especially back kind of in the, Clinton, Bush W and on, he was, at NSA. He became a very public figure. But when he was a young buck, he and I bonded together and did a lot of interesting things. And one of which was my job was to bring and kind of automate the map production system. It would take us 2 to 3 days to make a map by hand, 8 cartographers on staff. So when I came in, I built a system, wrote most of the code, hired out some code from some friends at South Carolina, and we built a system that we can now turn around a map in about 4 hours. Mm-hmm. Now, what that meant was, it used to be that our maps would only be in those long-term reports, which were not the sexy part of that business.
Yep.
The daily report was the sexy part. So now,
because that ultimately feeds up to the president's briefing,
right, and
on stuff. Yeah,
as you can imagine, anything that gets that kind of visibility gets more attention.
Don't mess up the map.
And so, yeah, or what Richard would do to Clark, is what he was known at the time. He would turn to an analyst and say, "Head up, talk to Heivly. I want a map as part of your story." Mm-hmm. So that kind of changed the importance of our department. It was fun to be part. I'm all of 27, 28 years old. And then, Scott, the really interesting thing, ask Perplexity when the first desktop publishing came out. Mm-hmm. Because I did make a trip to Boston with Dick Clark, and we went to visit. It might have been like HP or someone, whoever had like the first desktop publishing. And so we got that. And I then went and automated that daily report. So instead of being typewritten off a Wang computer, in all text.
It looks a lot nicer.
It looked like a newsletter as we know it today. And
Yeah.
spent a bunch of time with George Shultz, was the Secretary of State. I mean, it was pretty heady days for a 20-something-year-old.
Yeah. So this is saying Mac Publisher was the first on the Mac, and then later on, it got to be all this PageMaker is probably what you used, I imagine.
Yeah.
I kind of, in my mind, I'm now fictionalizing you to be Jack Ryan, so it's kind of like this little analyst in the basement.
In my mind's eye, I'm sure was.
Yeah. Sees something and like, did you ever see something that like became like super actionable, or like, I know you may not be able to tell specifics, but like, that's kind of like a, could be kind of an exciting thing.
Yeah. I mean, twice I remember getting a call
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the night, and then all they would say is, you need to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sexier of those was when Chernobyl blew up. And I was sitting in a briefing room at the State Department with all the big shots. And what they asked me to do, they had analysts who were trying to guess the wind direction and the strength of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And they were sketching out maps. And I actually went on the computer and made a map myself, which I actually was not a very good cartographer, but they needed something quickly. So I spent all night making maps of the area. And if you ever watched the HBO Chernobyl series,
Yeah.
I mean, amazing, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember there's the guy that's standing on top of the, kind of looking down into the reactor? I mean, we had pictures, now it's not crazy, but at the time, the fact that we had a satellite who could be focused on that and see pictures. So I used to see stuff like that. And it's not that those things were like crazy. It's just that you saw them way before anybody else would see them.
Yeah. Yeah. The real-time nature of them is very unusual.
Yes. Yeah. Like in the moment.
Yeah.
And, what they didn't want anybody to know is that they could take a satellite and turn it in the moment and get a picture that could see a guy's face.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. So then you obviously didn't stay in the government. What led to you leaving, and what'd you do?
Well, two things. And, there's a little bit of a career kind of nod here. Even though we were going from the last few years of Reagan's second term towards, George Bush Sr., and even though it was Republican, the faces all changed to the people I was working with, right? New Secretary of State, even new Deputy Assistant Secretaries like Richard Clark. So they were all moving, and now my access and ability to play at a bigger scale. And I just was sensing that wasn't going to be a good thing or a fun thing. And at the same time, this group up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 50 cartographers had found me and said, hey, we have 50 cartographers making maps by hand. You built some systems. Would you come up and help us automate our map production system? I'm originally from Philadelphia. My wife's at the time's from Philadelphia. It's kind of like a move back home and
hang out with 50
and
awesome,
50 more geeks.
cool,
Yeah, map geeks.
Cartographers. Yeah. Talk about maps 24/7.
24/7. It's true, by the way.
How do you organize 50 cartographers? Like get a segment of the world, or like or like different types of maps?
Well, what you do is you find the 2 or 3 people who are really curious, who want to figure this out with you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been my mode all the time. I'm a crawl, walk, run kind of entrepreneur, if you will. Mm-hmm. So just find a couple people. We went all Mac. I've always used a lot of commercial software to then turn that into map stuff. Mm-hmm. So like Illustrator, if you remember that. Yeah. So we would, figure out the systems that would push it into Illustrator and then use Illustrator to finish the map.
Yeah.
So we were doing a bunch of stuff like that.
So, what's the name of the company, and then what were they like printing these, or like what were they up to?
So they were a map services company. So we made maps for other publishers. Mm-hmm. So National Geographic, the Park Service, every textbook, that has a little history map in there. A lot of telephone books. Do you remember telephone books?
Yeah.
So that's what Donnelly Cartographic Services was what was called in Lancaster.
So were you, I guess they were manually doing it and you were going to help them kind of like automate it. So you're like the computer guy. Yeah, I get it.
We're just trying to create more efficiency, speed, that kind of thing.
Yeah. What are some of the things you built in that, so you used some commercial stuff so that you weren't reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Was there like, at that point, you were thinking about workflows? Like, here's how the requests are going to come in. We're going to give it a ticket. Or were you more just like really focused on the map piece?
Yeah, I'm definitely a technologist, not a operator per se. And, there was a whole staff of people that kind of had the workflows down, and I was just trying to make it But I would say, like, within that first year, a couple opportunities started to kind of knock on the door. And this is when I started kind of shifting from an applied technology guy to more of a business or business development person. Because one of the things someone came up with is like, hey, I build a little routing engine to go from city to city in the United States. You want to go from Philadelphia to Orlando? I'll give you the directions there.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought that was pretty cool.
There's one external that kind of reached out to you?
An external.
Because if you build a routing engine, the one thing you're going to need is maps.
Maps, right. And they had
maps.
And in fact, it's not really a map. It's a database of roads.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily a map, right? And so they're like, yeah, we got this technology. We're not sure what to do with it. And so we developed a system that used our canned maps, put the routes over top of it, put the highlighted route, and we went and sold that to every auto club at the time. This is circa 89, 90.
Yep. Okay.
And at the time, there was 14 auto clubs generating about 15 million routes a year.
Yes, this was like AAA. You would say, I'm going on a trip from here to there, and they would send you triptychs.
Triptychs,
exactly.
exactly.
Like these really interesting flippy map things.
4-inch by 9-inch, spiral bound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, flip them over.
Yeah. And
they
you
call those sausage links, by the way.
And they would come to you. Sometimes you would do it. I remember my grandfather would do it himself. Like he would get them, but he didn't want them to draw on the map.
Yeah, because usually it's some 17-year-old kid in the AAA office who would then take a yellow highlighter.
Yeah.
And
he would like order them, but he would say, I don't. And then like get really mad if they did the route because he wanted to do the route. Because like that's how he's going to, like, it's really a thing back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone had a very, very, and then you would save them. It became an artifact of the trip, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
People would write on them and say,
right. You could write.
I saw the big ball of string over here.
Right.
And the, Babe the Blue Ox was over here and things. Yeah.
Yeah. The largest ear of corn.
Yeah.
So that's the impetus for MapQuest, by the way.
Yeah.
So we did city to city routing. We layered that on a PC. We rolled that into the operations center for any of these auto clubs. Mm-hmm. Printed on this very expensive, I think it was about $40,000. No, sorry, it was about $10,000 to do 40 pages per minute, black on white paper printing. Uh-huh. And so on a laser printer, right? Yeah. So that was, and then these little customized trip plans, and they were a little more customized than the triptychs.
Yeah.
Because we also hacked together a bunch of points of interest, and then we could say, hey, within 5 miles of your route is the ball of twine.
Yeah. I sense you may have gone by the ball of twine
a couple times.
So then how did that turn into MapQuest? And we'll explain to people what MapQuest is, but this is one of the biggest online brands of the era.
And one of the first.
Yeah, one of the first.
Frankly. So we're sitting in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I do this deal and kind of product, I'm more like a product guy at the time. I put this product together. I'm working with a buddy who's kind of the sales guy. We sell this to every place. I think we're generating about $4 million a year in licensing fees. We probably
kind of within the Donnelly world, you've got this new product and you're kind of like you're an entrepreneur. So you've created this little startup within Donnelly.
Okay, exactly. And we still have this big map services group doing their thing. But I'm curious and I'm never done and there's always something, right? The bug. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, so Donnelly is all, we were part of a $6 billion printing company, the largest printer in the world. And we have access to lots of people and things. And so, my boss's boss, if you will, it's like, you guys should head out to California and you should just go see what's going on. So I just, for months and months, I go meet with Apple and I go meet with, Broderbund, if you remember the big CD-ROM publisher, Sony, who was a very active technology player at the time. And we just start meeting with these people and, now it's 90, 91-ish, 92, and 93, our desktop PC now comes with a CD-ROM. And now I can put that whole routing thing that was sitting on a preformed PC in an auto club. Now I can put it on a CD-ROM and you can do it at home.
Yep. And
that was a huge deal. And we sold that and made a ton of money on that. And we actually
still at Donnelly?
Still at Donnelly,
okay,
still at we had that entrepreneurial little nub. We now had named Geosystems. Sexy.
Fancy.
thank you.
It's good branding.
Good branding. And we're also building map software for, brand new car phones.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you remember, you could, your car phone was locked, screwed into your,
Mm-hmm.
your dash or something, and you pick up the phone and an operator.
And like you had like
a brick. Yes, exactly. And that operator, you could say, where's the nearest Italian restaurant? Well, that would use our system.
Huh.
So we were doing that. And I was kind of starting to focus really on the consumer stuff. So we came up with the trip planner, the CD-ROM. And then, it was 93-ish, and we did that for a while. And we also I was going to bring in my Apple Newton.
Ooh.
So we actually had.
I was one of the few people that had the Newton.
Yeah.
I love the animation when you would throw something away. The paper would like ball up and then kind of go into the little garbage.
As you know, it had a lot more trick than actual value.
Yeah. Lots of sizzle, not a lot of steak.
We had the top selling products on the Apple, which made us the Newton, which made us a very big fish in a small pond.
Maybe I had one. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That involves some international stuff and a lot of business development and product development. So we did that for a while. And then the next thing came this thing we started. By the way, the first time I saw the internet was at South Carolina. Mm-hmm. Went down to visit my friends, and they were doing some research. And February 96, we launched MapQuest. So along the way, we had been able to acquire the databases that allowed us to go address to address, which we all take for granted today.
Yeah.
Remember, the previous products were city to city.
Yeah. So the idea of MapQuest was now you're going to have an internet. CD-ROM's gone. It's on a server. Now people at home without a CD-ROM can load up maps, look at them, and do routes. You can say, I want to go from point A to point B. It will figure that out for you, and then you can print it out and take it along, which is very handy.
Yeah, the funny thing is, if you think about, we build a digital product, and that should save lots of paper, but we probably killed more trees of the people printing those directions than anything else. But I will timestamp this. This is 9 years before Google Maps comes out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
9 years. So that's how early we were, and we were a big early internet player.
Yeah, yeah, and then Garmin and those types of things aren't really in consumer use at this point. Maybe there's like some $10,000 version of a Garmin or something like that. But this was the only way to really figure out where you were going.
Yeah. So
and avoid the old physical map flipping through the thing and folding it.
Right. And also kind of real time. I need to know where I am.
Yeah.
You can have a map, but if you don't know where to place yourself, then you don't know where you're going relative to that. That sounds silly, but the interesting thing that you may or may not know is that, we didn't have to build the databases for all the streets and all of that stuff. That those databases, which two providers both spent upwards of about $1 billion each, were getting ready for the in-car navigation, which was always a rolling 5 to 6 years away. For first starting hearing about it in the 80s, here we are in the 90s. So when we showed up one day and knocked on their door and said, hey, this database you're building, what if we just license it? We'll give you a little bit of money. And they're like, free money? We don't have to do anything? No, just once a quarter, send us the database. So we were able to get in that business actually relatively cheaply. We had to figure out the internet software, right? Mm-hmm. And this is before any of the platforms that we're aware of today about how you write code. Everything was C++ and figuring things out and building interfaces for the first time. But but we didn't have to worry about the database, which was the biggest nut. And we paid nothing for it until they finally caught on.
Yeah. Yeah. You Trojan horse their database and
make
the money. And then I remember the clever thing about MapQuest is you would print it out and there would be ads on there and there'd be like, places to stop, and you could tell they were sponsoring it. Were you involved in the creation of how did you decide to start a company? What did it look like? Who were the co-founders? And then how'd you get to the monetization? Tell us the OG founding story.
Yeah. So we're sitting there kind of 95-ish, right? We're pretty hot. Things are going pretty interesting. And that boss's boss in the big printing company says, we're starting to hamper these guys. Mm-hmm. We need to let them fly, and we need to spin this out of Donnelly. So we went and raised some money from venture capital, a group in Boston and a group in the Valley, and we spun it out, still called Geosystems. Mm-hmm. And then later we raised another round of funding. By the second round of funding, I'm sitting on the board. and don't have an operating role anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, and now we're just starting to fly, and then the MapQuest stuff comes out, and it's just going faster and faster.
Did you get operational from MapQuest, or were you at the board level at that point?
Board level for really the rollout. I mean, I was involved obviously in the product development piece of that because that's the extension of PCs, CD-ROMs, Newtons, right?
Yep.
You think about it, our technology is getting smaller, tighter, right, for every one of these platforms. And then in 99, took MapQuest public. I left the board. They needed adults. I was, 35 years old, something like that.
Did you get to go to where'd you guys go public?
NASDAQ. I did not. But then I was asked to leave the board and an adult come on pre-public. So I didn't get to enjoy that piece of it.
Did you still have founder shares?
Remember, founder shares are relative, that this was a spin out of a large company. So it's not your typical, it's more of an entrepreneurial journey than an entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Did Donnelly continue to invest in it and do well from it? Or were they just kind of it's not ours, we want to shed it? Or
that's a whole nother podcast, which is really interesting. I had left MapQuest, Geosystems MapQuest, and joined Donnelly. They said, you did such a good job. What if we gave you $25 million and have you invest?
Nice.
So I became a VC in kind of 97, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Sat on the board because I still held a sizable portion of the company, represented them, and then learned how to become a venture capitalist and spend my whole life out on 101 up and down the coast.
Cut your teeth on the corporate VC, which is nice. You don't have to go fundraise.
Yeah, I have to fundraise.
You got a big balance sheet to invest off of. It's a lot easier than having to do both sides.
Exactly. And by the way, had this, if you can remember back to that time period, remember the phrase content is king. Well, if you think about it, Donnelly at the time is touching every single piece of content. They're a book publisher, magazine publisher, catalog publisher, financial publisher. So I could make investments in companies that were disrupting how content gets distributed, right? Internet and such. So, I was able to bring my portfolio companies into deals that they would never have been able to get into. So it was a really fun job for a couple of years.
Yeah. That was called 77 Capital.
Yeah, exactly.
Is 77 a reference to a highway or to some
It's our address in Chicago.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. I figured there was some connective tissue into the corporate mothership. What was VC like back then? And what do you remember as, did you have, there's always the gut away list. And then what was your biggest success investor wise as a corporate VC during that little Donnelly window there?
We had probably about a 40% return. So we did really, really well. Be honest, I think anybody with half a brain could have done well in that time period.
Yeah, because of the internet bubble. So.
It was internet bubble, and we could get into just about any deal we wanted to. What I remember seeing the stat that, from I don't know what the starting point, but let's just say from 95 to 99, the number of VCs tripled.
Yeah.
They went from about 1,000 to 3,000 VCs or something like that. I don't remember if those numbers are correct, but relatively. And what I was sitting on all these boards of all these portfolio companies, and what I started to see is that VCs were sitting on boards who had never operated or had an operating role in their life. And, I'm young and persnickety and, got my, young attitude on. That started to drive me crazy, right? You sit in a board meeting and some VC would start giving operating advice and had never hired, fired, or, made a hard decision in their life, right? And they were coming from Bain and, all these consulting groups, BCG. And so by the time, after a few years of that, I said, I want to actually go back to being an operator.
Yeah. And knowing you now, you're pretty outspoken and not one to hold back. So I imagine,
you can imagine
people tend to get more easy as they get older. And so I imagine you were I was a pain in the ass in the boardroom. Yes.
Yes.
And the VCs like that don't like feedback. They're not looking for feedback from some guy that's younger than them. That's from some quote unquote dumb map company or something.
I remember this one VC, he had this habit, and we've all probably seen one of these people where you'd have this 20-minute discussion on something and discussions end and the guy running the meeting, the CEO, is ready to move on. And this person has to come in and then just summarize everything. And I would just crawl out of my skin.
Yeah. Man, it'd been fun to be at some of those.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're doing that, and then what'd you do next? How did you go back and found another company? Did you decide you love this VC world?
I didn't. I didn't love the VC world. I loved, the greater thing that we do. But I made one mistake. I went to actually work for Accenture for 9 months.
Ooh, fun.
At 40.
You're like, I hate these Bain and consulting guys. I'll go work for one.
Right. Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Well, what I was thinking is I was getting ready to, I had an idea to do a roll-up of map companies.
Okay.
And I'm working on that. And someone I knew was the recruiter for Accenture. And they said, we want someone to take over their entire internet business. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds sexy. And they just kept throwing more money and more money and more money. And finally, they wore me down. What I realized within 2 months was it was a corporation. And I don't do well there.
And in the interview process, they say you're going to be this.
Yeah.
Have all this responsibility. You're basically going to own.
You can do whatever you want, all the money you want.
And you get inside of it.
And then you get inside of it.
Never that way.
So that was a short stint, and just interesting to understand that, our career is an arc, right? And has lots of interesting places. And
at this point in time, you're in Chicago.
I'm in Chicago, right? And just a few months into that, good old Ray McNally starts knocking at the door. And I had spoken to them a few years before about a potential role, and it didn't work out, and they came back again. For those who don't know Ray McNally, they're the largest at the time map publisher, about $185 million business, 1,000 employees, own their own printing presses, road atlases, street maps. I think we had 4,000 map products of different kinds. I mean, this 140-year-old business.
Had the internet started disrupting them, I imagine?
It was, because this is now, kind of 99, 2000. MapQuest comes out in 96. Ray McNally still doesn't have a map website. And so I'm like, okay, here's another entrepreneurial opportunity, but in a map company. And, if you think about, I'm a geographer, cartographer. I'm going to be doing Ray McNally, and I've already done MapQuest. Like, what gets bigger than that, right? And I've also done it in the government.
Yeah. And probably one of your first maps that you ever saw was a Rand McNally.
Completely.
Yeah, and it's probably a brand that's just been like embossed in your brain.
And, I do, as I do keynotes and speeches all over the world. And usually I look out in the audience and I'm like, how many people have never heard of Ray McNally? And if you're under 30, your hand goes up, maybe even 35 these days. And I said, well, next time you're at home, get in your dad's car in the back seat. There'll be at his driver's seat, there'll be a pouch. Reach your hand in there. And I bet you $1 you're going to find a Ray McNally product or a road atlas or a street map.
Yeah. Cool. So you're CEO of that, and it's almost feels like it's kind of a turnaround, I would imagine. Because maybe they were okay, maybe they were like going sideways, but the internet was starting, like newspapers were in a nosedive at this point in time, and phone books were just going away. So they bought you in feels like it was probably a little bit of a turnaround kind of a situation.
Definitely turn around, restart, whatever, rescue us.
Yeah.
And we got pretty far. We if you remember at the time, we created a wholly owned subsidiary called RayMcNally.com. We funded it with $10 million of outside funding. If you remember, Borders and all of the, Walmart's even, they were creating these wholly owned subs, taking them public, and then swallowing the old business back so you can get different multiples, right? Yeah. So we had all these dreams, and we were building a new business. I think I hired 60 people in 3 months.
Were they private or public?
Private. Okay. And a PE group had bought them out a few years before.
Okay. So that gave you some, when you're public, you don't have a lot of degrees of, you can't go to the shareholders and say, yeah, we're going to, yeah.
Yeah. The good news, the reason I had turned it down years before, it was still family held, even from 120 some years, 130 years.
Like the descendants of Imagine.
Yeah, the McNally family.
Mr. McNally, yeah.
Yeah. Sandy McNally was a good guy and good friend. 90 heirs, all picking out their pennies of dividends. But a PE group came in and bought them, and unfortunately, Scott, it was too little, too late. Like 4 or 5 years of, and we were building different product, but they still had this. It was almost like Clayton Christensen's. We weren't really. I was limited to how much I could disrupt the old business.
Yeah, it's hard to burn that to the ground.
Yeah,
because you need the cash flow to do what you want to do.
Quick, interesting story that you appreciate. So 2001, the P group decides to sell the company. Mm-hmm. And so by this time, half of the executives have left. I'm the only one who understands the map business. Brought in the fourth CEO since I had been there in 4 years to just sell the company. It's a McGraw-Hill, former executive. He's going to be the face. Would know a map if it hit him in the head. And I'm sitting with Deutsche Bank, and I'm writing the book, right, mm-hmm. for months. And they're starting to, get the group together. And so we actually rented a place out in the O'Hare Airport just to outfit it with all our products. We didn't have to bring the potential acquirers through the office. So we had this little thing set up. And if you know the process, you hope to get 2 or 3 interested parties. They're going to write a letter of intent. And we had 6 lined up letters of intent that were due into Deutsche Bank on September 12th, 2001.
Oops. Yep. Bad timing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Even if it had been September 10th, it would have been.
It still would have.
Yeah. You're too close to the zone of impact.
Yeah.
And all that thing.
Yeah.
So, our generation, we've gone through kind of the internet bubble burst, and then 9/11 was, these things in hindsight aren't as disruptive, but when it happens, you know what's happening, but you don't know how bad it, in your mind, you're like, well, this tone of uncertainty is like very far down.
Yeah.
Like maybe people won't travel for years. Or
you don't know.
What does all this mean? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
going to war, like what's
what's happening next?
Yeah.
And obviously any kind of M&A and, the company was losing money. And so what's going to happen? Yeah. And so
a deal didn't get done, I'm going to imagine.
Deal didn't get done. The face is sitting there. And so I remember going to see him and he said, well, can I turn you into our CTO? We're gonna have to close down all these businesses.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not my thing. And so good luck.
Yep.
I'm just gonna go figure something else out, which I'm not afraid to do. So
yeah.
But
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you gave that the old college try, didn't work out, had a couple headwinds there that were insurmountable.
But a lot of fun. No regrets.
Yeah. No regrets.
No regrets.
So then what you did a couple other little things in there, and then you're going to get to the triangle, which is the really exciting part. But give us the breadcrumbs that led you here.
Yeah. So, love Chicago. It's probably my favorite city and big city in the U.S. I'll take it over New York, Boston, L.A. any day, even San Francisco. I'll take it over Philadelphia.
Oh, controversial.
A lot friendlier.
Yeah.
Midwest people.
It's the city of brotherly love.
The real city of brotherly love.
As someone from the South that's been there, I'm like, their branding is misleading.
It's a little. I can't argue with you there, my dear old Philly. So my wife Patty, for a bunch of months, like, I'm really tired of the cold. And so I'm running a little software company, and work virtual. And so we just decided to pick up, and as we've done a couple times, and just where are we going to go? I made the spreadsheet. Looked at a lot of places we've been and haven't been, and came down to either Chapel Hill or Boulder.
Okay.
And we selected Chapel Hill.
I thought a map would have been involved in this decision. Like
for sure.
Snow.
The map's always in the head.
Right. Cool. So how did we win?
My parents and aging parents are in Philadelphia. Her aging parents are in Rochester, New York. And we just said, all things considered, if we have to jump in a car and do something, that's a lot easier from North Carolina than it is from Colorado.
Cool. Awesome. So you were just kind of, had your own like consulting thing and moved down, or?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little 6-7 person software company.
Okay.
We were writing software for school districts to handle their IEPs, individual education plans. These are for kids that have special needs. They have, the teachers will have to build a plan. So it was a little automated, formy workflow kind of thing.
Cool. Awesome. And then you moved down here and you chose Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
And you've been here ever since?
I've been here. Yeah. We're coming up. It'll be 20 years in July of 2025.
Yeah. Okay. So then that's going to be 2005. Yep. Sorry.
2005.
And then.
So let me feed you.
What was so you land here, kind of guy out of Chicago. What was the ecosystem like as an outsider?
So
who do you remember meeting?
I will tell you, I will tell. I shouldn't laugh like this. I laugh because he's a mutual friend. I did go to a little private VC meeting, and it was really silly. And I think, with all respect, I think it was like run by CED, but I don't know. And it was outsiders. And I had an affiliation with a VC group, and I was kind of an EIR at the time, kind of always on EIR for this VC group out in the Valley. Mm-hmm. But sitting next to me was Jason Kaplan. And so he's like, "You want to get out of here?" I'm like, "Yeah." So, it doesn't sound like Jason, right? So we went out and talked. There's an important lesson here is that Jason and I didn't do anything after that time. I did get parachuted in as the CEO of a company called Ultimus. I don't know if they were.
I remember that.
Rashid Khan, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't like, I remember vaguely. Was it something in insurance?
It was a business process management. So they had a tool to automate workflows.
Okay.
They were doing about $22 million in sales, losing about $7 million a year. And the interesting thing, Scott, is they ended up bringing in a guy, recruiting him to be CEO, who was was the third CEO at Ray McNally with me. And so he was coming into town. He said, "Hey, let's have dinner." The little company I was doing the IEP was a workflow. And so we got talking, and he said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I just sold out of that. I'm kind of a free agent. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm sitting in Chapel Hill." And he's like, "Well, I'm being recruited to do this company. It does this stuff." I said, "Well, make sure you find out. Here's these 5 questions you need to ask him." He says, "Well, if I take the job, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. Sounds like we're going to do this together." So we ended up trying to rebuild that thing, and that lasted just a couple of years. Till
Did that have local funding? Or you bought in by a VC?
No, they were out of Boston. A big, I can't remember the name of that, but a pretty big VC group.
Okay.
We got within a year, we had reduced sales to 19 million, but we had only lost $1 million, and we were all well on our way. And then 2007 and 8 hit, and we're $150,000 licensed software and then services on top of it.
Oh.
So,
yep, that's gets tossed out pretty. So churn up, sales is gone. Yeah,
yeah. So that was fine. So the cool thing is, it's 2009-ish. I exit out of that, and you might be seeing a trend about every 3 to 5 years. Either I get bored or they get bored with me.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I start reading about Y Combinator and Techstars. And I said, my wife can attest to this. I'd had a dream for 10 years that at some point I'm just going to go buy a building. I'm going to wire it, right? I'm going to load some servers in there. This is how dated the dream was. And
put some killer maps on the wall.
I'm going to put some killer maps on the wall. I'm going to bring these kids in, and we're just going to help them build their companies. And I'll bring in my buddy who's a developer, my buddy who's a marketer, a salesperson, and we're just going to kind of help. And this idea has been done. It's now like almost the studio that kind of play, they call it these days. But I started reading about Y Combinator and Techstars. I'm like, this is it. This is the new version of that. And so I called up Kaplan and I said, do you know anything about this stuff? Remember, we met about 3 years ago, and we went and had lunch or breakfast or coffee with Joan Seifert Rose of CED and Jason. And I said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I want to put an accelerator here in play. And that was circa September 29th was my first meeting in 2009.
And that was called?
I called it the Triangle Startup Factory. It had a couple different names along the way. But that's when I would have met you, because what I had learned in a previous, some previous friends is what networking, the importance of it and how to do it. Mm-hmm. So from October of 2009 through 2010, 5 months, I probably sat down with 275 people, and I'm sure you were one of them.
Yeah.
Everyone who moved, who could pretend to spell the word entrepreneur.
Yeah, my memory is it kind of quickly got abbreviated to Startup Factory.
Yeah.
And then you guys were like the OG in American Underground. So,
we were the first tenant in American Underground.
Yeah. So it was a good pitch. Everyone's like, the Goodman family's like, we're going to renovate this thing. It's going to be awesome. And we're going to have this whole area for entrepreneurship. And they left out this little piece. It's in the dank, dark basement. So you go over there, you're like, oh, this is amazing. Where's the startup thing? Like, oh, it's down there. You go down there and you're like, wow, it's suddenly you start sneezing. You're like, maybe some mold growing down here. Then you follow a trail of mushrooms, and it led to Chris and Chris's office.
Yeah, pay no attention to the mold or the smell. It's probably the biggest sales job I ever did is convincing people to come join me down there. But as you know, in kind of community and what we do, like when you get surrounded by the people who think like you
don't need windows.
The windows become secondary. I spent 5 years down there.
Yeah.
So, when I think about it, Scott, like doing that was really the kind of the next thing for me. Like instead of doing one startup by myself, now I'm getting involved with 10, right, in my cohort, but I'm also getting involved with everything else in the community that moves. And it felt like I had really landed in my sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you want to do this, and I imagine you had to go, you had to go raise some money. So you had to go kind of almost like an LP structure kind of a thing. It's almost like you got a little fund you have to raise to go run the cohort. Did you do it like every year was a different one, or you had enough money to do multi-years?
So there's two different kind of time periods in that. So the first one, I started calling it Triangle Startup Factory, but then there was an accelerator in DC called Launchbox Digital. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they had kind of, all their members had gone to work for Obama. And so they were kind of sitting there. And so they had some investors down here in Chapel Hill. So they kind of drug that down. We'll just do the short version. But they raised the money and then asked if I would run it for them.
Yep.
And so I did that for one cohort. It landed well. That was fall of 2010. Everyone said, great. And they're like, well, what's next? And I'm like, well, I really don't need you guys. So I'm going to go out on my own, and I'm going to do this the way I want to do it. I don't want to be an employee. I'm not a really good employee. Right. Yeah. And so it took me a year, but then I hooked up with Dave Neal, and he and I went and raised $7 million to run the startup factory for 4 years.
Okay.
8 cohorts.
Okay, that was nice. So then you got the fundraising out. You didn't have to every year go.
Exactly.
With that. Yeah.
And that was one of the things that why it took me a little longer. What I didn't want the approach that the previous group was on is I don't want to be raising money all the time. It's like a nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
50% of your time is spent raising money. I wanted to actually do stuff.
Yeah.
And run it like a business.
Yeah. So there's one cohort that was kind of like the launchbox.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then your other cohorts. So if you're at this 5 years, and you're doing 10, so there's 40 companies and another 10. So like 50 companies.
So we did 42 combined.
Yeah.
We didn't always reach our 10.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about that in aggregate. What are some of your standout companies you worked with? Any of them, what was the biggest success? Any near misses in there that you're kind of?
I think, Anil Chawla was in our first cohort.
Oh, yeah?
So Archive Social.
That's a good one.
So that was a good one. That's pretty much paid off our, from a fund point of view, we're break even now on the fund.
Yeah. So as a power law company, right? Because it returned the fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
You learn a lot. You learn how different entrepreneurs think. You learn that we both know there's not one way to do this, right? Some people are crawl, walk, run. Some people are swing for the fences. Some are, think differently. Some people love more input. Some people don't want any input. And so as you go forward, you start, we talk about pattern recognition in funds, right? You start to figure out patterns that work for you. One of the things I would say at a meta level, our first few cohorts are probably were a lot better than the last few cohorts, not because we didn't choose well, just because in the beginning, we were able to scrape the best of the best because there was nothing that went before us.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things we did that was not common in other cities is that I felt pretty strongly about when Dave and I put our model together is to run twice a year. So from a community building point of view, we were kind of always on, right? You're 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on again. And so we were able to kind of create, I think, a lot of energy and a lot of awareness around the program and help a lot of people out.
Yeah, the kids today would call it vibes. What was fun is, and you had a big co-working facility too.
Yeah.
So it was all very physical. So you'd walk by, you'd go in the basement, walk by, swim through a river or whatever to get there.
Yeah.
And, you guys always had something cool going on in there. And it was kind of like, hey, I want to see what's going on in the entrepreneurial world. I'll swim by, see Heivly and Dave and just kind of poke around, or you would invite people over all the time to just kind of sit and have lunch and meet the cohort. And it was super, super accessible and very transparent, which was kind of neat.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that was very intentional, right? I call it sometimes the entrepreneurial zoo, where people would walk by, look in the windows.
Well, fishbowl kind of thing.
Yeah, fishbowl.
Oh, look at the entrepreneurs, aren't they?
Yeah, aren't they? Yeah, look at that one. Yeah, so, I think we still have, Dave would know this answer. I'm not good with details, but probably 6 or 8 companies still alive today, 10 years later. David Shaner of Offline,
okay.
One of my favorite.
Yeah. My first coffee meeting with him, I'm like going to the Starbucks and I forgot to look him up and like, well, there's a guy with a whiteboard. That's kind of weird. And I'm like looking around and I'm like, oh, that's my guy. He's like sitting there with a 6-foot whiteboard. And he's like, I don't normally do coffee meetings because I like whiteboards. So I thought I'd bring it with me. And he's like, literally, he's a tall guy. He's like sitting there like,
yeah, he's 6'5", by the way.
He's like holding it with one arm and he's like, crazily, he's like sketching away, showing me this thing. It's hilarious.
But one of my favorite entrepreneurs of the cohort. He's just so smart and he's curious and he asks questions and, he's done, I think he's done, 2 pivots, and I think he's got the model down. He's now in 10 cities.
Survived COVID. He's, it's tough.
So, a lot of relationships, a lot of understanding. I see previous comment about, I sometimes call it career ADHD, but, not only do we do kind of between Launchbox and Startup Factory, I do 42 companies, I do 8 cohorts. But, do you remember the big top, right? Yeah. So you just start seeing ways that you can play a role in your community. I know this rings true with you, right? Mm-hmm. You've, especially in the last few years, between the fund and First to List and the fund and, this podcast and other things, you start finding ways that you can add more value. Mm-hmm. That was a fun time to be.
Yeah. Big Top was a recruiting event. So you kind of got like a lot of candidates, you got a lot of people hiring and you just kind of had like a fun kind of party vibe of like,
Yeah. Take all the bullshit out of the recruiting.
There's a little bit of presentation to it, but yeah.
Just enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I ran 15 of those over 5 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Before GretBeat, before Exit Event, I had Triangle Tech Talk. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So that was crowdsourced news. I was still meeting, I used to be able to tell you this number, but I've had 5,000 plus one-on-ones in the community.
Yeah.
And you probably have pretty similar, open office hours.
Count, because then I'm always like, I probably need to stop doing that.
Yes. Yeah. That's like
you keep counting. You're like, what am I doing?
Stop counting.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
But then it's just so much fun to meet and hang out with smart people.
And how much do you learn?
I learned so much. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't realize, the number of times people go like, I can't believe you do this and you give your time. And I'm like, well, here's the secret. I get as much out of it as you do.
Yeah.
And I get to know what's current. Yeah. So, that's how those things like a Big Top is people going, I'm really trying to find something. I'd love to be able to get into Teamworks or offline media or something. I'm like, well, there's got to be a way I can do this rather than just doing one introduction.
Yeah. So I spend most of my time kind of like post product market fit. And then in what you did is like before, like that idea, that napkin diagram to first customers and revenue and stuff. When you set this up, do you think of it as an incubator or an accelerator and help people, what is the difference? I get that question a lot and I want to hear your answer.
Yeah. Incubators aren't around anymore. It's what your father used to do or your grandfather. So that's me being silly. And so now let me turn it to completely snobby. I have a very rigid definition of an accelerator. Mm-hmm. And that's based on the original Techstars Y Combinator model, which is an accelerator is a fixed amount of time. It's a mentorship heavy program that also invests in your company.
Yep.
So love American Underground. It's not an accelerator as an example, right?
I think co-working is not an accelerator.
Co-working is not an accelerator.
It's like a place to go work.
It's just a place. And by the way, they may have programming and speeches, and and seminars and webinars, and that's fantastic, but it's not an accelerator in my snobby point of view.
Yeah. And then when you started the Startup Factory, did you kind of go and explore what YC and Techstars had done and kind of take your personal favorite and kind of give it that Heivly flavor? Or did you start clean slate and say, here's how I'm going to create the Heivly way?
No, the Heivly way is actually to learn from others and then twist it into my comfort nature. At the time, Paul Graham was running Y Combinator. He wouldn't talk to anybody. I've tried a couple times. He's like, no, thanks.
So they kind of now have this open source mentality, but back then it was very much
very closed. I had talked to the guy that ran Launchbox. There's a guy in Austin, Texas that runs a Capital Factory. There's only 3 or 4 of these really at the time. And then I got in with David Cohen and Brad Feld at Techstars, and they just went, here's the whole playbook.
Yeah.
Here's the whole thing. Let us know how we can help. And, ask them a ton of questions, then put the Heivly spin on it.
Yeah. Okay. And then again, as someone that has never gone through one, but I kind of peer in there and look, a lot of it is kind of giving people the discipline to, and when I have a coffee meeting, I try not to do too many of these because I don't feel like I add any value with someone that's like at napkin diagram. A lot of times they want me to tell them their idea is good or bad.
Yep.
I kind of like refuse to play that role.
I do too.
Because I've tried it before and I'm bad at it.
And by the way, who is anybody to say an idea is good or bad?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Except that there are a lot of people that want to compete with Uber, and I'm kind of like, I try to nudge them pretty hard away from that. But like, if it's like obviously like this is going to be, this, you have set yourself up to do the hardest thing possible. Then so then they're like, well, what do I do? And I don't know the answer, right? Like, so I'll say, go build something, find a customer, rinse and repeat. And a lot of it for tech founders, especially, they need that structure to kind of like learn how to go do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that like what a lot of the content is like teaching them how to, do that cycle of getting the customer feedback and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So today, most of the advice I give, and I'm definitely, zero to product market fit. Like that's my, what I realized 10, 15 years ago is that's really my strength. That's my interest. That's why I can provide the most value. As we get older,
you're a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll, or vice versa, whichever one you want to be.
Yeah. I'll be whichever one you don't want to be. What I typically do is I'll start, depending on how much they understand our language, and if they know nothing, I'll say, go get the Lean Startup by Eric Ries and read that. And when you're done reading it again, and then give me a call. I may turn them into Search the Business Model Canvas or the Lean Canvas. Another book, Ash Mora wrote Running Lean, which is more of a tactical application of Eric Ries's Lean Startup. Those are my two favorite kind of things. And by the way, I built a whole workshop that I've done 30 times for this, and I call it Idea to Launch, right? So you can see where we're heading here. But for the most part, it comes down to some really simple things. And this is, I think what my strength is, to simplify things. I said, all right, you guys are, you people, whatever you folks are really heavy on product development, and I need you to do some customer development. And here's a couple things to think about. And these books will kind of tell you what that is. And if you're already familiar with that, then let me ask you some questions to find out that they're still not doing enough. And, get out and talk to people, right? Mm-hmm. Steve Blank, noted guy, like, go talk to 50. Don't talk to me until you talk to 50 people. So a lot of that is just, I call it mindset, like trying to reframe their mindset and get them pointed at a slightly different North Star than the trajectory they're doing. Yeah. Because almost everyone, including myself, are heavy on the product build part and not as heavy on the customer part. And I don't think you can bring that in early enough to the mindset.
Yep. Okay. How do you know when someone is through, like, an entrepreneur comes to you and says, I'm through product market fit? Like, how do you, Chris Heivly, help the entrepreneur, or like, what's your view of like when you're through that?
So tell me.
I'm sure you have a very crisp definition.
Yeah. So I, me, it's a little bit of humor. I say this at the end, not at the beginning. Product market fit, my definition is when if you had taken your product or service away from your customers, they would literally start crying, right? And so implied in that is engagement. And so, like, all right, how many customers or users do you have? And so, and obviously this is relative to enterprise versus consumer, whatever, but it's usually probably a number that's way, way, way too low. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Of that, how long have they been using the product? How often do they use the product? If you called them up, would they know who you were? Would they be happy that you called them up? These are all ways to show how deep that engagement is between your customer, user, whatever, and your product or service. And I'd say 95% of the time, they're not even close to product market fit. And so they come in, and I'm sure you see this too, they come in wondering, how do I scale? And I'm like, you're not ready to scale yet. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have enough engagement. You don't have enough users. And then it's into like retention and, David Shainer's favorite word, right? Like, understanding that whole model of acquisition and retention and churn. And so don't scale until you got that. So I want to make sure I try to hit them. I'll hit them nicely, but pretty hard to go, not sure you're ready for that yet.
Yep.
And by the way, and every dollar spent on hiring a sales team will only be wasted 2 years later.
Yeah, I was going to say what will happen is they think they're through product market fit. They'll scale, go to marketing, and it'll look good at first because you're closing deals, but then like the tail catches up, and then you've burned through a lot of capital. Yeah, you got to really nail that before you scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say someone looks at that and says, that's going to take forever. What are the Chris Heivly top tips? Now you've seen so many companies. What are the top tricks to get through product market fit as fast as possible?
I'm going to answer that question in a second, but I want to laugh a little bit and tell you. So, by the way, one of the things I always do when I sit and talk to someone, I said, listen, here's my thoughts. Use it, don't use it. I'm going to sleep the same tonight anyway.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things about being a mentor and advisor is that, I can't tell them what to do. It's not my job to tell them what to do. If you're a current or future mentor, like this isn't your business to assign, tasks and do anything. So my approach is definitely more Socratic and more by asking questions.
Yep.
So repeat your question again. Sorry. About product market fit.
Over time, you've seen enough of this. You've probably seen some best practices for ways you can kind of there's no silver bullet, right? You
Correct.
Can't just go from 0 to 100, from napkin diagram to product market fit. But there's some things you can do, that you have seen done that have kind of sped it up. Like what can, if you were meeting with a founder and they said, how do I speed up this path to product market fit? What would you say?
Well, it depends on what the product is a little bit, and even just enterprise versus consumer. I think the answer is different. But
most companies in the triangle are B2B. So
right. So let's do kind of more B2B or enterprise. Yeah. I'm going to ask them. I'm going to say, all right. So, I don't think you're going to be a product. I think. Where do you think? How many customers do you think you'll need to your product market fit? And I have a number in my head, and so they may ask or they may waffle around, and at some point I might say, well, I think you need to get to 50 customers, right? Some B2B number. Mm-hmm. Consumer, that might be more like 1,000, right? Yeah. So I might say 50. Now, by the way, I might add, so how can you and I prove to an investor who wants to see product market fit, how long do those customers have to be engaged? So that's one of my favorite words, like the engagement part. And so, at some point I'm going to try to get them to come up with at least 3 months of engagement. Mm-hmm. And then how often? Is it weekly? Is it daily? I mean, the old adage for consumer products is if you're not touching my product daily, you're not worth shit, right?
Yeah.
That was the bar.
Yeah.
So what is it for, and, we're not even talking about how you acquired those customers. I don't care if that was manual to get to 50, right? I don't care because you're not scaling it yet. But I want to know that, and then I usually say, so tell me about the last 5 customers tell me, what's their names? Who are they? What do they do? How do they use your product? Mm-hmm. If you don't know answers to those things, or I know I'm maybe not answering your question the right way, what are the tips and tricks? Know all those things.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't scale.
Know your customer intimately.
Yeah. And don't scale. Right now, your job isn't to scale. Your job is to really understand your customer's problem, how your solution fits into that, how important you are to them. Because if you can find that magic, then you can find 1,000 others. But don't try to figure out how to find 1,000 others until you know the first 50. To me, that's very like a Seth Godin kind of approach, like your first rabid 1,000 customers. Mm-hmm. That's who you care about.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not a revenue number. It's not a number of employees. It's not money raised. It's all customer metrics. So just to kind of summarize them, how many do you have? How engaged are there, and the duration of that engagement, and kind of like the depth of the frequency of that engagement. And you would expect a founder and the founding team to really be locked in on these customers and answer questions.
The depth of their understanding of their business.
Who's your biggest customer? Who churned? Why? Yeah. What are you doing about it? And those, because so what you're doing is though you are setting them up to have a successful raise. And it's easier for you to be the bad guy than, they're out fundraising and be the bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice insight into my approach is I'd rather, I stole a line from Brad Feld and what their rules were working with Inside Foundry with the other partners, which was, and I've applied it in a lot of different ways, which is, honest feedback delivered kindly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so
you don't have to be the Simon Cowell.
No, I'm not going to be an ass or a dick about it, but I'm also, and by the way, I've gotten better at this in the last 10 years than I was in the first 5 years. I don't have to be just a cheerleader.
Yeah.
I will cheerlead you. I will encourage you, and I'll maybe help together chart a path, but I'm also going to tell you, here's where the reality is. So when that entrepreneur says, I want to replace Uber, he's like, okay, that's a massive undertaking.
Yep.
Let's start to, what do you got so far? Why are you going to be different? How are you going to differentiate yourself? Again, I will not tell them that's a stupid idea, but I'll ask a bunch of questions that hopefully will reveal that.
Okay, so then you got to the end of that 4 years, and then why'd you guys decide not to go forward? Were you seem to have about like a 3 or 4 year clock? Did that go ding, and you wanted to go do something else, or what was kind of like the tail of that?
Yeah, it's probably yes and.
Mm-hmm.
Dave and I went out to raise. Remember, we raised about $7 million the first time. We went out to raise $25 million. I now understand the same trajectory TechSarge was on, just like 3 to 5 years difference, right? Mm-hmm. And we got to about 13 in 2016, and then it just stopped and zero for 5 months. I think many would have done a rolling close and just closed on that and went forward. Our goal at the time was to expand and run programs in Wilmington, Winston-Salem, and start to kind of make a statewide platform. I thought, we're still a very developing community here, and those were very nascent, but maybe we could create a kind of a bigger, the sum of the parts kind of approach. I had set a minimum of 15, so we're very close to it. I probably drove that a little bit more than Dave, but I said, I only want to do it if we can, with 25, we're going to run multiple programs. We're going to have to hire some people, and we're also going to have powder to invest in the best that came out. That's the part we didn't get the first time. Mm-hmm. Scott, I also learned that the second fund is actually the hardest fund. I didn't know that at the time.
It's like the mythical man month applied to fundraising. Yeah.
And like, I guess, of course, totally in hindsight, but by the second fund, they want to know some of your results. Well, we're a seed fund. We're 4 years in. Some of them were 3 months ago. We're not going to see results for 4 or 5 years. So we're kind of caught in this netherland. Your first fund is all promise.
Yep.
Your third fund is definitely results.
Yeah.
Your second fund, depending on the timing, is this ugly stepchild.
Well, it's even worse because there's this thing called the J curve where, and this is what like punches you in the face as a early investor is you deploy all this money and you're like, man, we invested in good. And then it's like loss. All your losses come first.
Yeah.
You're like, you're just getting punched in the face. And then you have an exit, but it's like kind of a bad one.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
And then another one. And then like you mentioned you still have 8 companies going or something?
Yeah.
Like, so then your best ones happen, last at the tail end.
10 years is the average.
Yeah. So that makes it really hard to ask questions like, well, how many exits have you have? How many zeros?
Right.
Well, we got some zeros and no exits yet. Yeah. So it's, this is the hard thing about, and then this 10-year cycle makes it hard to course correct.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you got these like opposing kind of,
So
headwinds.
I kind of feel your pain on that one.
Yeah. And I also have to be honest. I mean, I've raised, between the corporate VCs and I probably raised, $60-70 million in different ways over the years. I probably deployed just as much. I'm not a very good fundraiser. Mm. And there's something in my mind psychologically, and I only know this in hindsight, having gone through that year, that when we tried to raise 25, there's something about like raising money for an idea, which is I can point to the plant, versus raising money for me. And again, it's my problem. And in hindsight, I think I'm not sure I'm a great fundraiser. I'm not sure I told the story the right way. So
you're probably a little too honest. Yeah. Sometimes I'll have LPs come up and they're like, well, how does this private company investing thing work? And I'm kind of like, I really think you're ready for the risk profile. Like to me,
yes, that's if you were asking that question.
Yeah. And I'm talking about angel investors, not institutionals, but like, yeah.
So, which is fine. I mean,
but if I was a good salesperson, I just like want the money no matter what. So like there's like a little bit of a boundary that you probably don't cross that some people do. But yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I definitely know, that I can't cross a boundary.
Yeah.
Even if I wanted to, it's going to come out just really shittily.
Yeah.
But, my 3 to 5 years was also up. So this was a 7-year run almost. So,
yeah. So then you got latched onto Techstars. How did that happen?
yeah. Another great story. I mentioned that in 2009, I reached out and David Cohen and Brad Feld had given me a lot of information about how to run a program and accelerator. And I kept in touch with them, just as a good kind of, connecting piece. And but after Dave and I decided to shut down the startup factory, I reached out to David Cohen and I said, you need to replace us here. Time for, our community is mature enough. You guys need to come in. And so we had a couple chats over the phone over a couple months. And
so the pitch was Techstars Triangle Techstars.
Yep. Which I still think is something that we should think about. And by the way, they're thinking about it. So, the story is a nod to, keep connections and don't be afraid to reach out and this networking thing, whatever it is. And so Dave and I had a couple chats over a couple months. And at one point he said, hey, why don't you come out and spend the day with us out in Boulder? And for those who don't know, at the time, the Techstars office and Brad's Foundry office are across the hallway from each other in Boulder. And he said, go out, you see Brad and talk to him about stuff. And I wanted to talk to him about writing a book together. That was my pitch. And just talk to Cohen and hopefully convince them that we have all the elements to run a Techstars accelerator in Raleigh-Durham. Again, complete community approach. And the story goes, I sit with Brad first and he says, well, what are you doing? I said, well, one of the things I'm thinking about doing is that there's 14 decently sized cities within 4 hours of Durham. And many of them have come to Durham, wanting to see how the hell we do this entrepreneurial stuff. And maybe I'll raise a little $5-8 million fund and I'll go out and run some workshops in these places and help them out. And I'll cherry pick a couple interesting, I'll do something like that, maybe that. And Brad goes, I know you're meeting with David and after we're done here. Tell him that. Make sure you tell him that. I said, and then he gets up and he goes to the bathroom. I haven't confirmed this yet. I think he goes out and he plants a seed, right?
Yeah.
So, an hour or two later, I'm sitting with Cohen. So what are you thinking of doing? I tell him the same thing. And he said, well, how would you like to do it for the world? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Brad put a little bug in my ear. We've been wanting to do this. How do we help other communities kind of rise and share our insights? We've been
at this point in time, Techstars is only in Denver, or had they started to do?
Oh no, they're probably 25 to 30 around the world.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
So this is 2017.
Okay, so gotcha.
Dave and I shut down late in 2016. This is late in 2016, December, and I'm like, all right, I'm game. And we're like, well, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do it inside Techstars, outside Techstars? I'm like, my ego's in check. I don't need it to be called Heivly Co. Let's use Techstars.
Heivly Stars?
Heivly Stars, yeah. Star Heivly. And so, went and spent 4.5 years building a consulting business, flew all over the world and talked to guys like you and I in 100 cities. And we had 15 contracts that I sold, totaling about $8 to $9 million, some of them 3 months, some of them 3 years. And from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Lima, Peru to Taipei, Taiwan to on and on.
So their model seems to be they need a sponsor. So someone has to put up some bucks. And then sometimes it's a big corporation like the Cox one or whatnot.
Yeah. Comcast and Alabama Power. And
or like a nonprofit like the CED kind of like somehow coalesces a bunch of money and that's probably the minority of it, though. It seems to be more corporate dollars and then they have Techstars something. And so it's like a syndication type model.
Yeah. And that was kind of, when I was there, they got up to, 48 or so accelerators running around the world. The quick story is, as I left, I did my 3 to 5 years again. COVID, I can't fly anywhere. I don't want to fly anywhere. Time for me to chill out a little bit. I miss spending more time back in the Triangle.
Nothing's more exhausting than that travel. It's like fun when you get there, but just like the whole, it increases your stress levels. Things at home are stress. It's just like, it's very hard living.
And Scott, I'm not a young guy. I'm probably I'm not just the OG. I'm the O of the OG. I'm the old of the old guard. I know O is original gangster, but anyway, I'm the old guy. And so I remember one year I did 9 international trips, including India and Taiwan twice. it just gets tiring.
Yeah.
And then,
congrats, you got 2 million miles. You get to travel more. Yeah, like,
exactly.
Not exactly what I don't want to do.
Yeah. But I do miss all the upgrades, by the way.
Upgrades are good. Yeah.
But to finish the Techstars thing, it's interesting. I mean, I'm still friends with those guys, and we still talk every so often. And so they hired a CEO to kind of really blow up big, and it didn't work out. Most of the time that I've been gone now 3 years, David has taken the CEO role back, and I won't share any inside stuff, but it's kind of like a return to even maybe before even the corporate deals.
Back to basics. Yeah.
And the basics are community-led, community-oriented. The community can raise the money. Techstars will sprinkle as much magic from their brand and their experience as possible. And so they'll probably get smaller to get better.
Yeah. I think Brad, did they just announce they're not going to raise the next fund?
That's correct. Yeah, it's been about 6 months.
So it was right on the way over here. I was talking to an entrepreneur from out there, and he was like, it had a huge impact on him. Like, they were just like, we don't know what's going to happen in Denver and Boulder anymore. Like, I guess they had two long-standing firms that both are winding down right now. It's kind of wild.
Well, Techstars, during this period where this woman came in to run, Mael, they decided, you can imagine a program that runs for 3 months a year, once a year, and all this overhead of office and stuff for 3 months a year. And so she decided that the way was, we'll only run in like LA, New York, London, and Singapore or something like that. And so all the programs, the one in Alabama, Cox, they're going to shuttle those down and move them all to New York. That didn't go over very well.
Yeah.
Including shutting down the original Boulder one.
Ah.
Austin, Texas, Seattle, the guys in Seattle, they were the third city in, I think it went. Anyway, so they're going to return to that and change the model so that it's not as expensive, and places like Raleigh-Durham can figure out how to engage with Techstars in a positive way.
Yeah. It's perfect for like a co-working place, just like rent a room for, I don't know. Anyway.
They have a lot of magic to help sprinkle and learn, especially to places like that are, I would put us in kind of a high developing. I in my book, I talk about nascent, developing, emerging, and leading. We're definitely in the emerging, but there's there's hundreds of places that are in that developing that could use a little bit of Techstars magic to hopefully grow up to be something as special as Raleigh-Durham.
Yeah, that's a good transition. So after Techstars, you are building forts. Let's talk about that. Like, where does that come from? Is that just hanging out with the grandkids building forts, or does this go back to Davy Crockett kind of when you were a kid? Like, where does
somewhere in
building the fort
between?
come from? Yeah.
So I built a lot of forts as kids, and I'm talking about lots and lots of forts. So we had a woods near us and a creek. If you're from Philly, it's a creek that ran through it. Built lots of forts. A guy named Marshall Clark, who with me wrote a lot of the original, the software for those CD-ROMs, Apple Newtons, and MapQuest. He and I have done 3 or 4 deals together, and somehow, and we're at this point we can speak in code, our own code, right, about how we riff on ideas, and somehow we stumbled upon the metaphor of building a fort. So if you think about building a fort, right, some of the first questions you ask is, okay, where are we going to steal the wood? Where's it going to be? What's it going to look like? And so there's a lot of metaphors and startups there. So I've used this build the fort analogy in both my books and in my consulting practice and in my writings. And the idea here is I'm trying to simplify things to eliminate the shit you don't need to worry about. So I'm sure I don't see this as much as I used to, but back in the early Startup Factory days, these 3 guys, MBAs from UNC or Duke, would show up, and they like, I'm the CEO, I'm the CEO, I'm the CFO. And I'm like, okay, CFO, you can go home. Like, there's nothing to count for probably years. So unless there's another role you want to take, right? And to the point, let's simplify this, like back to customer. Who's going to be your customer? What are they going to look like? Why are they going to care? So that's the whole idea of the build a fort metaphor that I try to bring. Just simplify.
Yeah. So if folks are interested, you can get them on Amazon. And then you have an awesome newsletter, and it's called Build the Fort, but it's at Heivly.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
that comes out weekly.
Yeah. So if people want to find you on LinkedIn, And you're just by nature, you're one of the most approachable people ever. So you're leaving for a period of time. You're kind of gone. You traveled the globe now. So, but home, this is still home. So
it's still home. I live on a lake about an hour and a half from here.
Oh, really?
So I don't even live actually in Durham anymore.
I didn't know. Well, thanks for making the trip. I appreciate that. Why do you spend so much time helping entrepreneurs? That's some people would look at that and say, time is your most valuable resource and you're wasting it. Like, you're like one of these folks, you never say, and this is when I meet people, that's what they love about the triangle. It's not transactional. So
yes.
You'll help people and you don't have to be on the cap table.
No.
It's not like, I'm glad to help you, but I need a quarter point
exactly.
Or something like that. Why do you do that? Some people would say that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think, well, if you say it's crazy, then you don't get it, right? And, it feels good. It feels like the right thing to do. And by the way, it comes back in me in ways that I can't even imagine that, lift me, sometimes monetarily, sometimes not monetarily, right? So it's not a transaction, but it's pay it forward or give first is a term that Brad coined that we use all the time. But in the moment, it feels great. And so I'll tell you a story. I just, about 3 or 4 years ago, a woman was coming out of the Navy. I got connected to Bunker Labs, right, which is a entrepreneurial kind of organization for veterans. And there's Bunker Labs places all over. She happens to be in Denver. So we get on office hours. We spend half an hour together. They're open. I still do 4 or 5 of these a week. And she's like, well, I think I'm doing this. And to be honest with you, I don't remember what I said, but I probably asked her some questions and did my normal thing. And about 8 months ago, she jumped back on office hours. And I said, so did we meet once before? I may not remember your name, but I'm going to remember your face. And she said, yeah. And in fact, I don't need anything from you today. I just want to say thank you because the words you shared with me 3 years ago, pointed me in a direction. And I now have she actually is using Legos. She's a Lego certified trainer. And she uses Legos to teach teenage autistic kids, of which she has 3, how to get things done and build things and work with people using Legos. I'm like, that's an amazing fucking story. And a couple of weeks ago, she said, hey, I'm going to be either in Durham and Charlotte. I'd love to meet you face to face. And so I went and we had a beer together Monday. So I tell that story to say, at some point, maybe something will waterfall to me. I don't know. But you plant all these seeds and you're doing good anyway. And it helps my region become economically better. She's running these cool things, helping people out. It's just the right thing to do.
Yeah. I'm pretty myopic. I just kind of stay in our little ecosystem. And occasionally I'll go around, but I'm like 99.9% here. And it feels really special to me, but you've seen so many. Are we just like the other ones, but we just feel special? Like what about the triangle is kind of unique, or are we really not that unique? And this is what ecosystems just look like?
No, we're really unique. And that thing you mentioned before is special to us. One of the things, as you know, you can get a meeting with any of us without any hassle, and we'll all take that meeting. It's up to you to get the second one or the third one if there's going to be one, right? And this is actually a great segue into Raleigh Durham Startup Week. After spending those 4 or 5 years with Techstars flying over the place, and I wanted to get back to my community, Raleigh Durham, I wanted to make sure that specialness stayed and that all the new people here didn't get lost or filtered down. So I've been, from little places like, Fort Wayne, Indiana, or Richmond, Virginia, or Knoxville, Tennessee, to big places, LA, Seattle, Amsterdam, Berlin. I can tell you that this is an easy place to connect into. I believe that connectivity is actually the baseline of being a great entrepreneur, learning from others, finding customers, investors, whatever, getting advice, not looking at life as a zero-sum game. You raising money doesn't mean I can't raise money or is a knock to me. 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 kind of mentality. We exhibit that, I think, on a daily basis here, and I want to make sure that doesn't go away. And that's why I created Raleigh Durham Startup Week with Archie and a group of people.
Yeah. So Raleigh Durham Startup Week is in the spring, and this when we're recording this at the tail end of January, but it's going to be coming up on
second week in April
7th to 11th.
Yep.
And it's right there in the name, Raleigh Durham Startup Week. So what you do is you take the 5 days of the week and you do 3 in Durham and 2 in Raleigh. it's free, which is really nice because I always hear folks, say about some of the other programming, it's too expensive. I'm going to spend $100, and this, a lot of people think this is crazy, but when you're in that 0 to 1 phase, every dollar, $500 is like some ramen you're gonna, or maybe a rent check that's harder to make because you're putting you don't have any income coming in, and you're just basically, doing that. So that's nice that you guys make it free. We appreciate that. So this will be the third year or fourth year? Fourth year. So
1,100 people showed up last year.
Yeah. Let's kind of, so now you have, over 1,000 people. The first one was smaller, and
about 300.
So it's grown really nicely. What's your vision for it? Like, where does it go?
Well, let's start at the thing I'm most proud of is that this is an all volunteer organization. We probably have 25 to 26 people. It's very grassrootsy and ground up. Archie and I, were co-chairs of the event for the first 3 years. We'll soon be announcing we have 2 different co-chairs for this year. So we kind of are, helping to build, the next,
It's designed to live in perpetuity because it's not tied to any individuals. It's almost like, I think you've designed it so you're like, you want to roll off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think I remember year one, I was trying to say, like, so when can I roll off? It turns out it had to be when you were on stage at the Carolina Theater where you were helping us out with the keynote. I'm like, well, it turns out not year one, maybe year 4. We're official 501c3. We run on a shoestring. One of the things other than this all volunteer, everyone takes a role in a really good way. Probably the other thing I'm proud of is the fact that the most oft heard feedback we get from entrepreneurs is, I've learned more in the last 2 days than I've learned anywhere else for the last year. Mm-hmm. And then they go, and it's free, so that's amazing, right? So that's a great addition to our ecosystem. Now the question is, now we have this 26-person group. What else can we do? We've run 2 of these so far. They're called knowledge spikes, and these are little half-day, very kind of specific. I think we did one on product marketing. We did one on social media for customer acquisition, and these are part of the group of 26 who say, "Hey, I have an idea. I want to run." And everyone helps them run this thing for half a day. So I'd like to see us run things monthly. So not just the annual event, but things every month. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll start adding to those.
Anything else you want to add?
No.
So appreciate you coming in and doing this. I kind of, I get a little cheesy on this, but I feel like you and this generation that's a bit ahead of me, you guys have planted some really good seeds here and created an organism that I'm trying to have an impact on. But to your point of rolling off with Raleigh-Durham Startup Week, one of the reasons for this pod is to like explicitly state this stuff and show folks what's going on and say, we're counting on you guys, downstream, this next generations to keep this vibe going, the culture that's been created, and this, openness, allowing anyone into the ecosystem. But also it's not transactional. We don't want to be the next Silicon Valley. We want to be our own thing that's different and better and special.
So yeah, the best of all we got.
Thanks for all you've done to help create that.
Oh, thank you.
For more Tweener content, check out the Triangle Tweener Time Substack at tweener.substack.com. For more Tweener content, check out tweenertimes.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon on Triangle Tweener Talks.